welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I would like to review this book, The Kitchen Daughter by J.L. McHenry. The reason I wish to review this book, which is a novel, is because the central character in it, the protagonist, is autistic, and I enjoy reading books about representations of autism, particularly female autism, or rather I should say women with autism. And I find that often representations of autism are very cliched and stereotypical. So you often have like a character, say, who's a savant or who's very into maths, and these very sort of stereotypical ways of portraying autism. Whereas this book was quite a sort of different portrait, and very kind of it resonated a lot with me because the character Ginny, she's a young woman. She's 26 years old, so a little bit younger than me, but sort of similar generation. And it's set in America. It's set in Pennsylvania, I think, if I remember correctly. And the character Ginny is really, really interested in food and cooking. And that's why this resonated with me, because cooking and food happens to be her special interest, hence the title, The Kitchen Daughter. She spends pretty much all of her time in the kitchen. She uses cooking and food to cope with the outside world, just a bit like how I use cooking and food to cope with the outside world. So I'll just read what it says on the back, just so you get an idea of what this book is about. After the unexpected death of her parents, shy and sheltered Ginny Salvaggio, a young woman with Asperger's syndrome, seeks comfort in the kitchen. The rich aroma of ribollita, by the way, is a Tuscan bread soup, something I only discovered through reading this book, and I really want to go make it. The rich aroma of ribollita, and ribollita, by the way, is Italian for reboiled, because the soup is even better once it's been reheated. Painstakingly recreated from her Italian grandmother's handwritten recipe, calms her senses. But it also draws an unexpected visitor, the ghost of Nonna herself, and Ginny soon discovers she has the power to call forth the spirit of any dead person whose dish she prepares. As her pragmatic sister pushes to sell the only home she's ever known, Ginny finds evidence of a provocative riddle from her parents' past that could be the key to her uncertain future. But can she cook up a dish that will bring them back long enough to help her solve it? Not to be read on an empty stomach, The Kitchen Daughter is an intelligent and moving, Publishers Weekly, debut from a brilliant new literary talent that considers the question, what does it really mean to be normal? With recipes and long, delicious descriptions of ingredients, cooking and delicacies, McHenry's first novel is of definite appeal to foodies, yet the compelling characters and twisting mystery constitute a story many readers will devour, the book list. A sensitive and realistic portrait of someone living with Asperger's, says the Literary Journal. And J.L. McHenry is a passionate home cook with an MFA from American University. She lives in New York City. So that's the book. This might take, we'll see how we get on. I might have to come back to this next week, because there's quite a little bit I want to say about this book, really. And as I say, I certainly could relate to the character Ginny. It might as well just describe me. I mean, I could be the kitchen daughter. I spend pretty much all the time in the kitchen. And I think for reason I think on the positive side, just looking at the positives of how Ginny was portrayed, she came across as quite a kind of well-rounded individual. She didn't have any sort of like savant abilities. You know, there was no talk about being obsessed with maths, or all the kind of stereotypical things that autistic people are often kind of gifted with, if you like, in representations. As her special interest happened to be cooking, which if you think about it, is quite a kind of relatively mundane thing. I mean, many people are interested in cooking, not just, regardless of whether you're autistic or not. You know, lots of people are interested in cooking, but obviously, if you are autistic and it happens to be your special interest, then because of the nature of special interests, it's taken to a whole other level. You know, it can become very obsessive, as I know all too well, when it literally is the only thing, you know, you think about. It's more than a hobby, it becomes your whole world, and it becomes a kind of way of coping, as I think all autistic special interests are, regardless of their subject matter. They tend to be a way of coping with the outside world and a kind of like escapism. You provide that escapism. It was interesting that she did have an ability to conjure up ghosts via her cooking, specifically through following the recipes of deceased relatives, and it had to be handwritten recipes that would bring the dead relatives to life as a ghost sitting on a stool in the kitchen, and then Ginny would quiz them about her parents' past, her family's past, trying to kind of unearth secrets in her family past. That kind of seemed to me like a kind of an interesting kind of almost parody. I don't know if that's what McHenry was intending. I guess not. But it came across to me almost like it was kind of like parodying almost the autistic with special abilities trope. Just that in this case, the special ability was something mystical. And yet, it didn't grate in a way that special ability trope usually grates. I think precisely because of the kind of magical realism element, it was kind of like detached from reality a bit. So it could be interpreted, you could interpret it actually as Ginny just hallucinating for Ghost, as opposed to her having actually a special ability in that area. You know, that's one way of interpreting it. Yeah, she simply hallucinated for Ghost. It wasn't a real ghost. She didn't actually have this ability. I mean, obviously, you know, it's a mystical ability that, unless you believe in ghosts, and I don't believe in ghosts, some of you might believe in ghosts, but I don't believe in ghosts. So to me, I think, you know, I would interpret it as Ginny just simply hallucinating for Ghost, or it being some kind of psychological apparition, as opposed to an actual real gift. It's interesting that one of her previous special abilities was an extrasensory perception at one time as well. And also, what's interesting is that once she's kind of reached closure, because it could be understood that the ghosts are helping her to deal with her parents' death, because both her parents died tragically in carbon monoxide poisoning on a trip. They end up dying of carbon monoxide poisoning when they stay at this hut on a trip they make. So she doesn't deal with grief conventionally, you know, she's very kind of deadpan, and I can relate to that because I don't show emotions conventionally, like when my mum died, for example. I didn't show emotions, you know, like, that's not to say I don't feel emotions or I don't have emotions, it's just that I don't display them conventionally. I'm not the type of person who, you know, outwardly displays emotion so I can appear like I don't care, and that's not the case. It's just that I don't exhibit emotions like other people, so people won't see me crying, or unless I'm having a meltdown, but that's different, then they will, but that's kind of like a bit different. But they won't see me ordinarily, say, crying or looking upset when something really bad has happened. I might have a meltdown over it, but then I'll be deadpan again. I might even be laughing. But it's just not because I find what's happened funny, just because that's my way of coping. But again, people will interpret that wrongly. So yeah, and it shows, I think, in this novel how so Ginny uses cooking to cope with her parents' death. That's her way of coping, and it could be interpreted psychologically that the ghosts that she conjures are really just a kind of psychological apparition, they're not real, and that they're her way of processing the death of both of her parents. And interestingly, once she has processed the deaths, and she can no longer conjure up their ghosts, like she's reached some kind of like psychological closure. So I think that's one way of interpreting it. So in the first chapter, she cooks up this ribollita, bread soup, and as I say, I really want to go and make this now. And that conjures up her Italian grandmother, because it's her Italian grandmother's recipe, and that's her dead granny, Nonna. And the grandmother gives her this rather quizzical, that's the word? Rather perplexing, that's what I want to say, perplexing message. She says, "Do no let her," and Ginny interprets this to mean don't let her sister do something, and she's not quite sure what she should be stopping her sister from doing, but she interprets it initially as not letting her sister sell the house, the family home, because her sister really wants to sell the family home. Her younger sister, who's really dominating, her younger sister Amanda, really wants to sell the family home, and Ginny's lived in this home all her life and cannot countenance moving out, because obviously she's, you know, a creature of routine, creature of habit, which obviously I can really relate to. I haven't moved out really. I mean, I have my own place now, but it's basically essentially right next door to my dad's, so I can relate to that, you know, wanting to stay in the same place forever and ever, not wanting to leave your roots. I think it's quite an autistic thing, so I can relate to that. But her sister really wants to sell the homes, and she interprets it as do no let her. She must stop her sister from selling it. But later on, is not entirely sure what the message is. That was her initial interpretation, but that changes as the novel progresses. There's also other secrets coming out of the family closet. For example, her sister's daughter, Shannon, Ginny's niece, exhibits signs of autism. Now, interestingly, I actually picked this up and I was like thinking, is this just me reading into it? But like, she parrots back things, and I was like thinking, that's interesting, because that's kind of can be like an autistic trait. And later on, it came out that actually her sister, in researching Shannon, because Shannon was having some problems at school, stumbled upon Asperger's, and then her sister kind of thought that Ginny might have Asperger's, but when her sister queried this to Ginny and said that she thought that she might have Asperger's, Ginny was like, no, because she thought that her sister was trying to impose a label on her, and Ginny wanted to be seen as like quote unquote normal in inverted commas, and she thought that her sister, by giving her a label, was trying to imply that she was broken in some way. And I thought that was quite a realistic portrayal, because I think maybe quite a few autistics possibly can relate to this, is that at least initially, when I, for example, myself, I can relate to it, at least initially, I was in denial when my parents suggested that I might be autistic, because it was my parents who first came to that conclusion, not me. They first suspected I was autistic when I was a teenager, and I think even before that, actually, my mum was thinking along those lines, but they were kind of wary about what labels would do. And also, of course, the understanding of autism back then was far more narrow than what it is today. Consequently, I think my parents were a bit ambivalent about it, but they thought I might have it, but they weren't too sure at that stage. But whenever they mentioned it, I was kind of like go into denial, because I thought they were trying to imply I was broken in some way. So I can really relate to Ginny's reaction when her sister first suggests that she might have it, because Ginny suspects that her sister's trying to use a label to kind of take away Ginny's agency. And make her more dependent on her sister. Bearing in mind her sister is very controlling, and I wasn't not entirely likeable really. But bearing in mind the story is told from Ginny's perspective, it is a first-person narrative, so you know you have to bear that in mind. Okay, so I'm going to move on to video number 2 now, but I might have to come back to this next week, so I do have quite a lot to say about this book. So moving on to video number 2 now.